Welcome back. Today's video, adding and subtracting linear expressions. Our essential question, how do I combine two or more linear expressions?
So we're going to add a little bit into our notes. We have some of it started here for you. But to add or subtract linear expressions, it means you're going to simplify the expression, which is a fancy way of saying combine any terms together that you can. Essentially, you're trying to make it simpler. You're trying to condense it down as best you can. In these problems, anytime there is multiplication, that's going to come before addition, just like it does in order of operations. So if you see any distributive property in the problem, you're going to do that first, and then you're going to come back and add together any like terms. So Mrs. King will walk us through this one.
Hopefully you have your blanks filled out in that first section. All right, we have to distribute first. That's what the parentheses are doing in this problem. We have a 4 on the outside, so the 4 needs to get to the negative 3x. So 4 times negative 3x is going to be a negative 12x, plus 4 times 7, which is 28. So the first thing I did was to distribute the coefficient 4 to the negative 3x and to the second term 7. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. So I have an 8x plus a negative 12x. Hopefully you didn't lose that negative. That would result in negative 4x. And then we can't forget the constant 28. So distribute first, then combine any of your terms.
All right, so here's two examples. I'm going to walk you through the first one with one strategy, and then Mrs. King is going to walk you through another one. Either way, you always start with the same thing. Get rid of that subtraction by making it adding the opposite, but make those negatives stand out so they don't get lost. Now, the parentheses in this case are really just showing us the two separate pieces. We're going to combine together 2x plus negative 7 and 3x plus 12. If there's nothing out in front of our parentheses, that means we're not distributing anything. So in this case, those parentheses really don't mean a whole lot in terms of how we're going to do the problems. We just want to combine together what we can. So I'm going to combine together my 2x and my 3x, that gives me 5x. Then I'm going to combine my constants, negative 7 and positive 12. Different signs, subtract, and take the sign of the higher number, so that's going to give me a positive 5. So those parentheses were just kind of showing us which numbers came together originally, but we just want to combine together any of the like terms that we can.
So the first thing we do when we look at a problem is to make sure that we don't have that number outside the parentheses, to make sure we're not distributing. In the second example, we are again not distributing, so he's going to go ahead and make that negative 9. And this time we have a x in the second parentheses, and he's going to go ahead and put that invisible 1 back in. The way that I have kids work their adding linear expressions is to line them up vertically. That way you're not going to miss a circle or a negative. It's just one more way of showing your work. So lining them up vertically, you've got your x on top of your x. So 8x plus 1x is 9x. Negative 9 plus 10 is positive 1. It's just another way of keeping track of your work so you're not losing your signs and you're combining what needs to be combined.
Now we're on to the next part, and this is where our negatives or our subtraction comes in. So here's what you want to watch for is when you're subtracting your two linear expressions from each other. Just like any other subtraction, we want to make it adding the opposite. But here's what we want you to think of. This piece out front is that negative. We want that negative to get distributed through to everything. So there's really an invisible 1 hiding there. A lot of times we just ignore it because multiplying times positive 1 doesn't change anything. But when that negative is there, we've got to make sure we distribute that negative 1 through to each of our terms. So that minus goes to the 2x and the 7. So negative 1 times 2x is negative 2x. Negative 1 times 7 is negative 7. My first term stays like it was.
And now is it ready to combine?
And now I look to combine my like terms. I've got a 4x and a negative 2x. Watch those negatives. 4 and negative 2 is 2x. And then a negative 3 and a negative 7. Same signs, add them together and keep the sign. So we get 2x plus negative 10.
So we want to see that work of the distributing, and we want you to rewrite what you're going to adding the opposites. So circling and underlining is fine, but we have to see some sort of work in your expressions. All right, he's going to add the negative 1 outside to the second parentheses, and now we're going to distribute the negative 1 to the negative 2x and get positive 2x. And then negative 1 times a 5 is negative 5. And then let's go ahead and line them up. 3x plus 9 on top of 2x plus negative 5.
Now you can only line these up once you've made it into an addition problem and distributed through that negative.
Those negatives have to be fixed. So 3x plus 2x is 5x. 9 plus a negative 5 is positive 4. So we don't care how you show your work. We have demonstrated 2 different ways, but we have to have some sort of work on your paper.
So the big part is that subtraction in between the 2 expressions. When you see that, make it adding the opposite, but that's when you have to put in that invisible 1. So you're distributing through a negative 1 to each of the terms in the second expression.
Okay.
All right, last little bit. Now we're just adding a layer of difficulty to it. Now you'll notice there's a number out in front of our parentheses. So anytime you see a number in front of the parentheses, that means distribute. And remember, distribute comes before we combine any like terms. So 3 times 1x is 3x. 3 times 5 is 15. My other piece stays the way that it was.
Unless they're both like that.
Unless they both happen to have one. You will see some like that. Now I can go back and I can combine my like terms. 8x plus 3x is 11x. 4 plus 15 is 19. This one's got a whole lot to change.
Sure, give it to me. Plus the negative in the first parentheses. We're going to distribute that negative 5 to each term in the second set of parentheses. So negative 5 times a positive 4x is going to be a negative 20x. Oh, tricky. Negative 5 times a negative 2 is going to be a positive 10. So we have to make sure that we're changing that to adding a negative 5, or the second part of that expression is just going to be a mess. 6x plus a negative 7 plus negative 20x plus 10. They're all different signs. Negative 20x plus 6x is a negative 14x. 10 plus a negative 7 is a positive 3. Tricky, tricky.
So whichever method works better for your brain, whether it's lining up or just adding your like terms going across, is fine. But watch for that distributive, especially when you need to distribute through that negative to each of the terms in that second expression.
Have a good night.